I am Chloe, 33 years old, and after 8 years of marriage, my husband threw me away like yesterday's trash because I could not give him a child. He left me penniless in the pouring rain, cutting off my credit cards and laughing as his pregnant mistress rubbed her belly. What he did not know was that the quiet man living next to my grandmother's abandoned cabin was about to offer me a deal that would turn my tragedy into the ultimate triumph. Within 6 months, I would be pregnant with twins, and my ex-husband would be begging on his knees when he discovered the true identity of the man who saved me. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to rebuild your life from nothing. The evening was supposed to be a romantic celebration of our 8th wedding anniversary. I wore the green silk dress Marcus always loved, and I arrived early at Le Jardin, the most exclusive restaurant in the city. I sat alone at our reserved table, feeling a fragile sense of hope. We had struggled with infertility for years, an exhausting journey of negative tests and silent tears. I genuinely believed our love was strong enough to survive it. Then Marcus walked through the heavy mahogany doors. He was not holding the anniversary bouquet he usually bought. Instead, his fingers were tightly intertwined with the hand of a blonde woman who looked barely 23 years old. She was wearing a skin-tight dress that prominently displayed an undeniable baby bump. This was the man who had held my hand during my lowest moments, now proudly escorting another woman into the restaurant where we celebrated our first anniversary. I froze, the polite smile dying on my lips as they approached my table. Marcus did not even look apologetic. He looked profoundly annoyed, as if my presence was an inconvenience. He casually pulled out a chair for her, making sure she was comfortable, then tossed a thick manila envelope directly onto my pristine dinner plate. "Sign them, Chloe," Marcus said, his voice cold. "They are divorce papers. Brittany is 4 months pregnant with my child. I am done waiting for a miracle from a defective machine." The words hit me with the devastating force of a freight train. A defective machine. That was how he saw me after 8 years of absolute devotion. I looked at Brittany, who offered me a sickly, sweet smile while dramatically rubbing her stomach. She looked proud, as if stealing my husband and parading her pregnancy was some sort of grand achievement. I had given this man my youth and my heart, and he reduced my entire worth to my reproductive capabilities. Before I could process the humiliation, a loud burst of familiar laughter erupted from the leather booth right next to ours. I turned my head and felt a second wave of absolute betrayal wash over me. Sitting there sipping champagne and watching my world collapse were my sister-in-law Rachel and her husband Jamal. Jamal was a ruthless real estate developer, and Rachel always treated me with barely concealed contempt. They had known. My own family knew about this affair for months and came to the restaurant tonight specifically to watch Marcus destroy me in public. Rachel leaned over the velvet partition separating our tables, her eyes gleaming with malice. "Do not look so shocked, Chloe," she sneered, her voice carrying easily over the soft jazz playing in the background. "This bloodline needs an heir. A barren wasteland like you should know when to step aside and let a real woman take over." I stared at her, paralyzed by the sheer cruelty of her words. Family was supposed to protect you, but Marcus and Rachel were looking at me like I was a diseased branch they were finally pruning from their precious family tree. Jamal chuckled darkly, wiping his mouth with a linen napkin before joining the assault. "Let us make this quick and clean," Jamal said, his deep voice dripping with arrogant authority. He pulled out a check and flicked it across the table. It landed right next to the divorce papers. "That is a cashier's check for $5,000. You will take it and you will sign the quitclaim deed transferring your half of the marital home to Marcus tonight." $5,000. I whispered, my voice trembling so hard I could barely form the words. "That house is worth over $1 million. I paid half the down payment with my own savings. You cannot just erase my contributions like they mean nothing." Marcus crossed his arms, leaning back in his chair with a triumphant smirk. "You have no choice, Chloe. I transferred all the money out of our joint savings accounts this morning. I canceled every single credit card in your name. You cannot afford a lawyer, and you certainly cannot afford to fight me in court. You have absolutely nothing. Sign the papers, take the $5,000, and get out of my sight before I have the restaurant security throw you out like the trash you are." These 4 people meticulously orchestrated my ruin while pretending everything was fine. I did not cry. I did not scream. The absolute shock temporarily froze my tears, leaving a hollow numbness. I slowly stood up from the cold table, leaving the insulting cashier's check and the heavy stack of divorce papers sitting untouched on the pristine white tablecloth. I walked out the mahogany doors into a freezing and torrential downpour with nothing but my small purse. Marcus had packed my clothes into a cheap suitcase left by the valet stand like discarded luggage. I stood alone in the freezing rain, gripping the wet handle violently stripped of my 8-year marriage, my home, and my dignity in a matter of minutes. My hands shook violently as I gripped the steering wheel of my 10-year-old sedan. It was the one asset Marcus had deemed too pathetic to steal. The pouring rain battered my windshield, mimicking the chaos shattering my mind. Every mile I drove away from the city felt like a physical tearing of my old life. I had only one place left to go. Deep in the outskirts of town sat a run-down wooden cabin left to me by my late grandmother. Marcus had always mocked the property, calling it a worthless shack, which meant he had never bothered to put his name on the deed. It was the only piece of the world that still belonged entirely to me. I pulled into the muddy driveway, my headlights illuminating peeling paint and a sagging front porch. The storm was relentless. I grabbed my cheap suitcase and bolted for the front door, fumbling with the rusty key I had kept hidden on my keychain for years. Inside the cabin was freezing and pitch black. Dust coated every surface, and the damp chill sank straight into my bones. I flipped the light switch, but nothing happened. Of course, the power had been shut off months ago. I sank onto the cold hardwood floor, pulling my knees to my chest. The numbness finally gave way to reality, and I wept until my throat burned. I had lost my husband, my home, and my future, all because my body refused to give Marcus the air his toxic family demanded. I woke the next morning, shivering uncontrollably. The storm had passed, leaving behind a biting chill. I wrapped myself in a dusty blanket and stepped out onto the back porch, desperate to figure out how I was going to survive. That was when I heard the rhythmic thud of an axe splitting wood. I looked across the overgrown property line and saw him. He was tall, powerfully built, and swinging a heavy iron axe like it weighed nothing at all. He wore a faded flannel shirt, rolled up at the sleeves, revealing thick forearms. He stopped wiping sweat from his brow, and his sharp, perceptive eyes locked onto mine. The local town rumors claimed his name was Elias, a 38-year-old former sheriff who had moved to the woods for a quiet, lonely life. People said he kept to himself and did not welcome visitors. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to stop my teeth from chattering. He did not wave or offer a polite greeting. Instead, he buried his axe into a tree stump, picked up a heavy duffel bag from his porch, and walked straight toward my property. I tensed, unsure of what to expect, but he stopped at the edge of my broken steps. "You have no power in there," Elias said. His voice was deep and steady, carrying a quiet authority that demanded attention. "The temperature is dropping tonight. You will freeze." He stepped up and set the heavy bag at my feet. Inside was a heavy-duty propane space heater, 2 full fuel canisters, a loaf of fresh bread, and a thermos of hot coffee. I stared at the supplies, utterly bewildered by the sudden kindness of a stranger. "I cannot pay you for this," I admitted, my voice hoarse from crying. "I have absolutely nothing." Elias looked at my tear-stained face and the cheap suitcase visible through the open doorway. He did not ask what happened. He did not ask why I was alone in an abandoned cabin. He simply nodded. "Keep the heat on low and crack a window," he instructed. "I will check the perimeter of your house later to make sure the storm did not damage the foundation." He turned and walked away before I could even say thank you. His silent generosity was a stark contrast to the loud, performative cruelty of my ex-husband and his family. For the first time in 24 hours, I felt a tiny sliver of safety. Over the next few days, I desperately needed a way to keep my mind from spiraling into absolute despair. I was a 33-year-old eco-landscape designer. Before Marcus convinced me to quit my job and focus entirely on grueling fertility treatments, I had built a wonderful career transforming dead earth into thriving ecosystems. I decided to start with the ruined garden surrounding my grandmother's cabin. I found some rusty tools in the shed and threw myself into the brutal physical labor. I ripped out toxic weeds, pruned dying branches, and hauled heavy rocks to rebuild the collapsed retaining walls. Every single weed I pulled felt like I was aggressively ripping Marcus and his vicious sister out of my mind. My hands blistered and bled profusely, but the physical pain grounded me. It proved I was still breathing. Every afternoon, Elias would step out onto his porch with a steaming mug of black coffee and watch me work. We did not speak to one another. We existed in a shared, surprisingly comfortable silence. I noticed how his intense gaze tracked my precise movements, how his dark eyes lingered on my mud-stained clothes and sweating brow. It was definitely not the harsh, judgmental glare I was used to receiving from Marcus's wealthy, superficial social circle. It was a deep, unwavering gaze of quiet respect. One evening, as the golden sun began to set, I struggled to move a massive fallen oak branch blocking the old garden path. My tired muscles screamed in protest, but I stubbornly refused to give up. Suddenly, large, calloused hands appeared right beside mine, firmly gripping the rough bark. I quickly looked up and saw Elias standing mere inches away. Together, we forcefully heaved the heavy branch aside. He stood dangerously close, smelling faintly of wood smoke and fresh pine. We locked eyes, and the unspoken tension crackled in the cool evening air. He saw my power, and my life truly began. The very next morning, the harsh reality of my situation violently interrupted the fragile peace I had found in the dirt. The aggressive roar of a high-performance engine shattered the quiet tranquility of the woods. A sleek black Porsche tore up my muddy driveway, intentionally spinning its tires and coming to a screeching halt right over my freshly cleared flower beds. The driver's side door swung open, and out stepped Jamal. My former brother-in-law wore a custom-tailored charcoal suit and expensive leather loafers that looked entirely ridiculous against the backdrop of towering pines and wild brush. He adjusted his designer sunglasses, a cruel, mocking smile stretching across his face as he surveyed my mud-stained clothes and the blistering calluses on my hands. "Look at you, Chloe," Jamal sneered, stepping carefully over a puddle to avoid ruining his shoes. Reduced to playing in the mud like a peasant. Rachel was right. You truly belong in the dirt. I stood up, gripping my rusty trowel tightly to keep my hands from shaking. "Get off my property, Jamal. You have absolutely no right to be here." He laughed, a harsh, grating sound that echoed through the trees. "Actually, I have every right. I just closed a massive deal this morning. I bought the 200 acres surrounding this pathetic little shack. I am building a luxury eco-resort for high-end clientele. Your disgusting eyesore of a cabin is sitting right in the middle of my planned grand entrance." He reached inside his tailored jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, tossing it onto the dirt at my feet. It was a check for $10,000. "Take the money and leave by tomorrow," Jamal commanded, his voice dripping with arrogant authority. "If you refuse, I will make your life a living nightmare. I have the zoning board in my pocket. I will have the city cut off your grandfathered water lines. I will sever your connection to the power grid permanently. You will be left freezing in the dark, and you will eventually beg me to take this land for free. You cannot fight me, Chloe. You are a broke, barren outcast." I opened my mouth to shout back, but the heavy thud of work boots hitting the wooden planks of my porch stopped me. Elias stepped out from the shadows of my cabin awning, casually tossing a massive steel pipe wrench from one hand to the other. I had not even realized he was there, quietly repairing my broken railing while I worked in the garden. Jamal turned, his lip curling in disgust as he looked Elias up and down. "And who the hell are you, the local handyman?" "Back off, lumberjack. This is a private real estate matter." Elias did not raise his voice. He did not have to. He descended the porch steps with a slow, predatory grace that made Jamal instinctively take a step backward. Elias stopped right beside me, his towering frame casting a long shadow over Jamal's expensive suit. "If you cut the water lines to this property, you will be violating County Code Section 412. Elias stated, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. This cabin possesses a historical utility easement. Disrupting it is a federal offense punishable by a mandatory minimum of 10 years in a federal penitentiary. Jamal scoffed, trying to maintain his arrogant facade, but I saw the sudden flicker of panic in his eyes. You think you can intimidate me with fake legal jargon? I am not finished. Elias continued, stepping 1 inch closer. The 200 acres you just purchased sit directly over a protected wetland runoff. Municipal Environmental Statute 87 strictly forbids commercial development without a highly restricted ecological variance. A variance that the City Council will absolutely deny the second they receive an anonymous tip about your illegal construction plans. I highly doubt your investors would appreciate funding a dead project. Jamal's face drained of color. The arrogant sneer vanished completely, replaced by pure, unadulterated shock. He stared at this rugged man in a faded flannel shirt, entirely unable to comprehend how a seemingly random local knew exactly how to dismantle his multi-million-dollar corporate strategy in under 60 seconds. Jamal opened his mouth to argue, but no words came out. He was completely outmatched, and he knew it. "Get off her land," Elias ordered softly. "And if you ever threaten her again, I will personally ensure your entire company is audited by the state tax board. Do we understand each other?" Jamal swallowed hard, his hands trembling as he backed away toward his Porsche. "You are making a huge mistake," he spat, shooting a venomous glare at me. "Both of you will regret this, I promise you." He scrambled into his luxury car, slammed the door, and sped away, leaving a cloud of exhaust fumes in his wake. My heart hammered against my ribs as I watched him disappear. I turned to Elias, utterly astonished. "How did you know all of that?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Elias simply shrugged, his dark eyes betraying nothing. "I read a lot." He turned and walked back to his property, leaving me alone with a swirling mix of relief and intense curiosity. That night, the bitter cold returned. I sat at my scarred kitchen table, warming my hands around a chipped mug of tea, wondering how long I could truly survive this fight. A firm, steady knock at my front door broke the silence. I opened it to find Elias standing on my porch. The harsh lines of his face were softened by the moonlight. "May I come in?" he asked. I nodded, stepping back. He walked into my kitchen. He slid a contract across my table. "I need an eco-therapeutic garden designed on a 50-acre plot I own," Elias said. "I will pay a $200,000 advance, but there is a condition. You must use half of that advance to hire Evelyn Vance." Elias said, his dark eyes fixed on mine. "She is the most ruthless divorce attorney in the state. You will not fight Marcus with tears or pleas. You will crush him with the law. That is my only condition." I stared at the contract, my mind racing. $200,000 was a staggering sum, enough to save my grandmother's cabin and restart my life. But the condition was what truly struck me. Elias was handing me a loaded weapon and demanding I learn how to use it. I picked up the pen and signed my name. Over the next few weeks, my days fell into a grueling but healing rhythm. I spent mornings surveying Elias's massive property, sketching designs for therapeutic water features and sensory gardens. My afternoons were spent in Evelyn Vance's office, compiling financial records and building an ironclad case against my ex-husband. During the evenings, Elias and I shared meals on my rickety porch. We rarely talked about my impending divorce. Instead, we talked about soil compositions, root systems, and the quiet resilience of nature. He treated my expertise with absolute reverence. When I explained why a certain fern would not survive the frost, he listened intently, taking notes. The contrast between Elias and Marcus was staggering. Marcus had spent 8 years treating my career like a cute, unprofitable hobby. Elias asked for my opinion and valued my intelligence. For the first time in a decade, I did not feel like a broken incubator. I felt like a brilliant, capable woman. The day of the divorce hearing arrived with a heavy downpour, mirroring the day Marcus threw me out. I walked into the courthouse, flanked by Evelyn Vance and her team of paralegals. I wore a tailored navy suit paid for by my first design milestone. I held my head high, channeling every ounce of the quiet strength Elias had shown me. Marcus sat at the opposing table, looking arrogant in his custom Italian suit. Brittany sat directly behind him in the gallery, wearing a tight maternity dress designed to emphasize her protruding belly. She offered me that same sickly, sweet, mocking smile she had weaponized at the restaurant. As the hearing commenced, Marcus's attorney, a slick man with a booming voice, immediately went on the offensive. He painted a tragic picture of his client. He claimed Marcus was a devoted husband who had suffered for years under the emotional volatility of a mentally unstable wife. "Your Honor," the opposing counsel declared, gesturing dramatically toward me. "My client endured endless emotional abuse. Chloe's inability to conceive a child completely fractured her grip on reality. She became erratic, refusing to work a proper job and draining my client's resources on futile holistic treatments. Marcus was forced to seek peace elsewhere. We ask that the court grant a disproportionate share of the marital assets to my client, as he is now the sole provider for a growing healthy family, while his ex-wife has clearly demonstrated an inability to manage her own life." I sat perfectly still. 6 months ago, those words would have shattered me. I would have sobbed, defended my sanity, and begged the judge to see the truth. But Evelyn had prepared me. She placed a reassuring hand on my wrist, her manicured nails tapping rhythmically against the wooden table. "Is counsel finished with his amateur theatrical performance?" Evelyn asked, standing up slowly. "Because if we are discussing the responsible management of marital assets, I have some reading material for the court." Evelyn approached the bench and handed the judge a thick, bound folder. She then walked over and dropped a duplicate copy onto Marcus's table. It landed with a heavy, satisfying thud. Marcus looked at it, his arrogant smirk faltering slightly. "Your Honor," Evelyn said, her voice echoing with lethal precision, "my client's alleged mental instability is a fascinating fiction designed to mask textbook financial fraud. Over the past 14 months, Marcus illegally funneled exactly $450,000 of shared marital assets into 3 separate offshore accounts." Marcus turned deathly pale. He scrambled to open the folder, his eyes widening in pure panic as he scanned the pages. Brittany leaned forward, the mocking smile completely vanishing from her face. Evelyn did not give them a second to breathe. "Furthermore, those offshore accounts are not registered in his name. They are registered under a shell corporation owned entirely by his 23-year-old mistress, Brittany Hayes. He deliberately drained my client's life savings, canceled her credit cards in the middle of a rainstorm, and left her homeless while using marital funds to purchase a luxury condo for his affair partner. I have provided the wire transfer receipts, the IP addresses used to authorize the transactions, and the deed to the condo." The courtroom fell into a stunned, suffocating silence. The judge, a stern woman with zero tolerance for perjury, flipped through the bank statements. Her expression darkened with every page she read. She looked down at Marcus, who was suddenly sweating profusely, completely unable to form a coherent sentence. "Is this true?" The judge demanded, her voice sharp like cracking ice. Marcus stammered frantically, looking at his lawyer for help. "Your Honor, I can explain. Those were corporate investments." "Save it for the criminal fraud investigation," the judge interrupted harshly. "Based on the irrefutable financial evidence presented by Ms. Vance, I am immediately freezing all of Marcus's bank accounts, investment portfolios, and corporate bonds. A full forensic audit will be conducted on every penny you possess." I watched Marcus sink into his chair, entirely stripped of his power. Brittany covered her mouth, realizing the wealthy lifestyle she had stolen was evaporating before her eyes. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I simply gathered my files, knowing this was only the first blow. The empire Marcus valued more than my heart was about to burn to the ground. The adrenaline that had fueled me through the courthouse doors evaporated the moment Evelyn Vance's sleek black car dropped me off at the edge of the woods. The storm had finally broken, leaving the afternoon sky a bruised, heavy purple. I thanked Evelyn, stepping out into the damp chill, but as soon as my feet hit the muddy gravel, a violent wave of nausea washed over me. I gripped the wooden post of my mailbox to steady myself. For months, I had been running on pure survival instinct, fueled by anger and the desperate need to reclaim my dignity. I had spent every waking hour sketching garden designs for Elias, or poring over financial documents to destroy Marcus. I had pushed my body past its absolute limits, ignoring the persistent exhaustion and the strange dizzy spells I attributed to stress and poor diet. As I walked up the winding driveway toward my grandmother's cabin, the world around me began to spin. The towering pine trees blurred together, their dark green needles bleeding into the gray sky. My breathing turned shallow and rapid. I tried to focus on the wooden steps of my front porch, telling myself to just make it inside, to just lie down for 5 minutes. I stumbled up the steps, my vision tunneling into a narrow, dark circle. I managed to push the heavy oak door open and step into the small living room, but the sudden temperature change hit me like a physical blow. A sharp, piercing pain shot through my abdomen, stealing the remaining breath from my lungs. My legs simply gave out. I collapsed hard onto the wooden floorboards, the heavy door slamming shut behind me. I lay there in the dusty stillness, unable to lift my head, my tailored navy suit soaking up the damp cold of the floor. My heart hammered wildly against my ribs, sounding like a frantic drumbeat in the empty cabin. I tried to call out for help, but my throat was entirely dry. The darkness at the edges of my vision rapidly closed in, swallowing the room whole. I lost consciousness completely. I did not hear the frantic pounding on the door. I did not hear the sound of heavy boots sprinting across the porch or the violent crash of wood splintering as Elias kicked the deadbolt completely out of the doorframe. My first conscious sensation was the feeling of strong, capable arms scooping me up from the freezing floor. I fluttered my eyes open for a fraction of a second, catching a glimpse of Elias's face. He was pale with absolute terror, his jaw clenched so tightly a muscle twitched in his cheek. He carried me out of the ruined doorway and down the steps, holding me against his broad chest. I heard the roar of his old battered pickup truck starting. He placed me gently in the passenger seat, wrapping his thick flannel jacket around my shivering shoulders. The drive to the local municipal clinic was a blur of sharp turns and roaring engine noise. Elias kept one hand securely on the steering wheel and the other gripping my cold fingers, constantly murmuring reassurances that I could barely understand through the thick fog filling my brain. He did not care about the speed limits or the muddy terrain. He only cared about keeping me alive. When I finally woke up properly, the harsh fluorescent lights of a sterile hospital room blinded me. I was lying in a narrow bed, an intravenous line taped to the back of my hand, delivering cool fluids directly into my veins. Elias was sitting in a plastic chair, drawn right up against the metal bed rail. He was leaning forward, his elbows resting on his knees, his face buried in his large hands. The moment he heard the rustle of my sheets, his head snapped up. Relief flooded his dark eyes, instantly replacing the stark fear that had been there earlier. He stood up and pressed a gentle, lingering kiss to my forehead. This quiet intimacy was not new to us anymore. 6 weeks ago, on a quiet night, filled with rain and shared confessions, the unspoken tension between us had finally broken. We had crossed the line from friends to lovers in the warm, firelit space of his living room. It was passionate, deeply respectful, and undeniably profound. Elias had treated my body with a reverence Marcus had never shown me. I had given myself to him completely, realizing that this rugged, solitary man saw my true worth. Before either of us could speak, the clinic door swung open. A middle-aged doctor with a kind face and a clipboard walked in. She looked from me to Elias, offering a small, reassuring smile. "You gave us quite a scare today, Chloe," she said, her voice calm and professional. "Your blood pressure dropped dangerously low, resulting from severe physical exhaustion and acute stress. However, we ran a comprehensive blood panel and an ultrasound to determine the root cause of your sudden collapse." I tensed instinctively, the old wounds of my medical history tearing open. For 8 years, doctors had delivered nothing but devastating news. They had told me my body was failing, that my treatments were unsuccessful, that my chances of carrying a child were statistically non-existent. I squeezed Elias's hand, bracing myself for another clinical tragedy. You need to reduce your stress immediately, the doctor continued, stepping closer. Chloe, you are not just exhausted, you are pregnant. The room went dead silent. The doctor turned the monitor screen toward us. You are carrying twins. They are healthy, developing perfectly, and you are roughly 8 weeks along. I turned my head to look at Elias. 8 weeks. These babies were certainly not Marcus's children. Elias stared at the screen, his dark eyes shining with unshed tears. He brought my hand to his lips, kissing my knuckles with overwhelming devotion. Against every cruel diagnosis, I was finally going to be a mother. 6 months passed in a beautiful blur of healing and unprecedented growth. The bitter winter melted into a vibrant spring, and by late summer my life was entirely unrecognizable. I was heavily pregnant, my belly carrying the miraculous weight of 2 healthy growing boys. The exhaustion and fear that once defined my existence were completely gone, replaced by a radiant energy I had never known. Elias and I had built a life together rooted in profound mutual respect and an intense, unwavering love. He moved me out of the drafty cabin and into his spacious, meticulously restored farmhouse just across the property line. He spent his evenings building 2 solid oak cribs by hand, his dark eyes softening every time he felt his son's kick against my stomach. He treated my pregnancy like a sacred event, attending every ultrasound and reading every medical book he could find to ensure I was supported. My professional life had also skyrocketed to extraordinary heights. The 50-acre ecotherapeutic garden I designed for Elias was a masterpiece of sustainable landscape architecture. Once the project was completed and photographed, my portfolio caught the attention of high-end commercial developers and affluent private clients across the state. I was no longer a struggling freelancer operating out of a dusty shed. I was the founder of a highly sought-after ecological design firm. My phone rang constantly with lucrative commission offers. I hired a small, dedicated team to help manage the overwhelming influx of new contracts. For the first time in my 33 years, I was completely independent, financially secure, and unconditionally loved. I had transformed the darkest moment of my life into a brilliant, thriving empire, and Elias stood proudly by my side every step of the way. Across town, a very different reality was rapidly unfolding for the man who had mercilessly thrown me away. The universe has a remarkably precise way of balancing the scales of justice. Marcus had built his entire identity on arrogance, wealth, and the cruel belief that my body was a defective machine. He had proudly paraded his pregnant mistress as the ultimate prize, certain that he was securing a flawless legacy. But when Brittany finally gave birth, the devastating truth about his pristine bloodline was brutally exposed. Their child was born with a rare, highly complex genetic disorder. The medical specialists confirmed the diagnosis with absolute certainty. The genetic mutation did not come from Brittany. It was inherited directly from Marcus. He was the one carrying the defective gene all along. The irony was poetic, but the financial reality was completely catastrophic for him. The child required immediate specialized medical care, round-the-clock nursing, and a series of high-risk surgeries that typical insurance policies flatly refused to cover completely. Because my attorney Evelyn Vance had successfully frozen all of Marcus's bank accounts, investment portfolios, and offshore funds during our ongoing divorce proceedings, he had absolutely no access to his wealth. He was completely trapped in a financial cage of his own making. The hospital bills piled up by the thousands every single day. Brittany, who had only stayed with Marcus for his money and lavish lifestyle, quickly became hysterical and deeply resentful. She demanded nannies and luxury postpartum care that Marcus could no longer provide. He was drowning in an ocean of crushing medical debt, forced to sell his expensive watches and designer suits just to keep the lights on in the heavily mortgaged condo he had bought for his demanding mistress. Marcus was not the only one collapsing under the heavy, suffocating weight of his own profound greed. Jamal, My vicious former brother-in-law was watching his real estate empire aggressively bleed out. Jamal had always funded his ruthless corporate acquisitions using heavily leveraged debt. His grand plan to build a massive luxury eco-resort over my grandmother's land relied entirely on a massive injection of capital from his primary investor. That wealthy investor was Marcus. When the family court judge permanently froze Marcus's corporate bonds and offshore accounts, she effectively severed the main financial artery supplying Jamal's company. Without Marcus's millions to secure his massive construction loans, the banks immediately began calling in Jamal's commercial debts. His active construction sites were abruptly abandoned. His contractors walked off the job due to unpaid invoices. The city council, already suspicious of his aggressive zoning tactics, refused to grant him any extensions or leniency. His corporate reputation was sinking fast, and his creditors were circling like hungry sharks. Rachel, who had proudly spent her entire adult life treating everyone around her like absolute garbage, was suddenly facing the terrifying prospect of complete financial ruin. Her custom-tailored dresses and expensive country club memberships were rapidly disappearing as their credit cards were systematically declined. Jamal was pacing their empty mansion at all hours of the night, fielding aggressive phone calls from furious creditors and threatening bankruptcy lawyers. They were both backed into a desperate, suffocating corner. They had burned every single bridge, alienated every ally, and destroyed their own family for the sake of a quick payday. Now that stolen money was entirely gone, and the consequences of their ruthless ambition were finally catching up to them. Their absolute desperation bred a dangerous, reckless kind of panic. They needed a massive influx of cash, and they needed it immediately to stave off corporate bankruptcy. They also needed a highly specific medical miracle to save Marcus's sick child and alleviate the crushing financial burden destroying their family. As they scoured their limited options, their greedy eyes turned toward the one person who was visibly thriving in the community. They saw my rapidly expanding landscape business. They saw my glowing personal success, radiant and undeniable. And in their arrogant, twisted minds, they truly believed they could simply demand my help, expecting me to save them from their own failures. They were preparing to make a desperate move, completely unaware of the impenetrable fortress Elias had built around me. The morning sun poured through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of my new design studio. I stood behind my wide drafting table, carefully reviewing the final blueprints for a commercial rooftop garden. My firm had recently moved into a renovated downtown loft space, a beautiful testament to the hard work and success of the past 6 months. My small team of highly trained designers was buzzing with productive energy in the adjacent room. I rested a protective hand on my swollen belly, feeling the strong, rhythmic kicks of my twin boys. My life was finally a sanctuary of peace and accomplishment. That hard-earned peace shattered instantly when the heavy glass doors of my studio were shoved open. The loud crash echoed off the exposed brick walls, startling my assistants. I looked up to see Rachel and Jamal storming into my private workspace. They looked entirely different from before. Rachel wore an expensive but wrinkled blouse, her eyes shadowed with dark, exhausted bags. Jamal looked stressed, his tie loosened and his posture rigid with aggression. They marched straight past my receptionist, treating my thriving business with the same disrespect they had always shown me. I did not back away. I stood my ground, my hands planted firmly on my drafting table. You have exactly 10 seconds to explain why you are trespassing in my office before I call building security, I stated very coldly. Rachel slammed her expensive leather handbag onto my pristine blueprints. We do not have time for your defensive games, Chloe. She snapped, her tone dripping with entitlement. We are here because of Marcus. His baby is dying. The genetic condition is deteriorating, and the doctors say the child needs an immediate bone marrow transplant to survive. I stared at her. That sounds like a tragic situation, I replied coldly, but it has absolutely nothing to do with me. I suggest you leave. It has everything to do with you, Rachel shouted, her voice shrill. The doctors ran the databases. The baby has a rare blood and tissue type. Marcus is not a match. Brittany is not a match. But you are. You have that rare antigen profile. I remember from when you and Marcus were doing those endless fertility treatments. You are a perfect match, Chloe. You need to come to the hospital with us right now and donate your bone marrow. The audacity of her demand hit me like a physical blow. I stared at my former sister-in-law. My ex-husband had drained my bank accounts, thrown me onto the street, and called me a defective machine. His family had laughed at my pain and cheered for my eviction. Now they were barging into my place of business, demanding I undergo an invasive medical procedure to save the product of his betrayal. An incredulous laugh escaped my lips. I looked down at my pregnant belly, then back up at Rachel's furious face. "Are you completely out of your mind?" I asked, my voice rising with power. "I am 6 months pregnant with twins. Bone marrow extraction requires anesthesia and intense physical trauma. Doing that right now could send my body into premature labor. It could endanger the lives of my unborn sons. You are actually standing in my office demanding I risk the lives of my own children to save the baby Marcus had with the woman he replaced me with." "You are being selfish!" Rachel shrieked, her face turning red. "This is a child's life we are talking about. You are just refusing because you are bitter and jealous that Marcus moved on. You owe our family this favor." "I owe your family absolutely nothing," I fired back. "Your brother made his choices. You made your choices. Now you can all live with the consequences. Get out of my studio." Jamal stepped forward, his fists clenched at his sides. He tried to intimidate me. "You are going to do this, Chloe." He threatened, his voice a growl. "You think playing in the dirt makes you powerful? I am a major developer. I know every inspector and client in a 50-mile radius. If you do not get in the car and go to that hospital, I will personally ensure your little landscaping business is completely crushed. I will have your permits pulled. I will blacklist your firm. You will lose everything." Before I could even reach for the phone to call security, the studio doors opened again. Elias walked in. He had come to take me to lunch wearing his dusty boots, worn jeans, and a faded flannel shirt. He took one look at the threatening posture Jamal had taken over my desk, and his dark eyes turned completely lethal. Elias did not waste time with warnings. He crossed the room in 3 massive strides. He grabbed Jamal by the back of his expensive suit collar and the belt of his trousers. With a display of raw, effortless strength, Elias physically lifted Jamal off his feet and shoved him backward. Jamal stumbled wildly, crashing into the glass partition of the waiting room. "Do not ever step foot near my wife again," Elias commanded, his voice vibrating with a terrifying quiet fury. Jamal scrambled to his feet, humiliated and enraged in front of my stunned staff. He aggressively adjusted his ruined suit jacket, his face contorted with absolute hatred. "You are making a massive mistake," Jamal spat, pointing a shaking finger at Elias. "You are nothing but a broke ex-cop playing house in the woods. You have no idea who you are messing with. I will bankrupt both of you. I will crush you until you are begging on the street." Elias did not flinch. He did not raise his voice. He simply stood tall, sliding his arm protectively around my waist. He looked at Jamal with a cold, mocking smirk that sent a chill straight through the room. "Keep that energy," Elias said softly. "You are going to need it." Jamal did not wait long to execute his promised revenge. 3 days after he stormed out of my studio, I was standing at the entrance of the 50-acre garden. The morning air was crisp. My dedicated crew was preparing to lay the final sustainable irrigation lines. Suddenly, a white municipal vehicle abruptly swerved onto the gravel path, blocking our trucks. A heavy-set building inspector stepped out holding a bright red stop work order clipboard. He marched straight over and slammed the official notice against our project board. "This site is shut down indefinitely," the inspector announced loudly. "We received an anonymous tip regarding severe soil toxicity. Preliminary reports indicate dangerous chemical runoff from illegal pesticides. Nobody moves another shovel of dirt until a full state environmental audit is completed, which will take at least 6 months." My blood ran cold. The garden was an organic, sustainable ecosystem. There were absolutely zero chemicals on site. I knew instantly who was behind this blatant corruption. Jamal had bribed a city official to manufacture a fake crisis. He knew a 6-month delay would financially strangle my firm, draining my capital through idle crew payouts and massive penalty fees. "This is a fabricated report," I argued, stepping into his path. I have independent soil analysis records proving this land is pristine. Take it up with the city council. The inspector smirked, displaying an arrogant smugness that mirrored Jamal perfectly. Until then, this site is dead. I drove back to the farmhouse, gripping the steering wheel in sheer frustration. When I told Elias what happened, he did not panic. He simply poured me a cup of herbal tea, his dark eyes calculating and calm. Let them dig their graves a little deeper, he said softly, kissing my forehead. Focus on yourself today. I will handle the inspector. Needing a distraction from the bureaucratic nightmare Jamal had orchestrated, I drove to the grocery store downtown to pick up ingredients for dinner. I was carefully selecting fresh vegetables, my hand resting gently on my prominent belly, finding comfort in the strong movements of my unborn sons. Chloe. The voice sent an immediate cold shudder down my spine. I turned around and saw Marcus blocking the end of the produce aisle. The sight of my ex-husband was genuinely shocking. The arrogant chief financial officer who had once thrown me out in the rain was completely gone. Marcus looked 10 years older. His designer suit hung loosely on his thinning frame, wrinkled and covered in coffee stains. Dark, exhausted bags hung under his bloodshot eyes. He looked desperate, like a cornered animal realizing the trap had permanently snapped shut. "What are you doing here, Marcus?" I asked, my voice devoid of emotion. "You are violating the restraining parameters my lawyer set." "Please, Chloe, just listen to me for 1 minute," Marcus begged, taking a frantic step forward. "My life is falling apart. The hospital bills are burying me alive. Brittany packed her bags and abandoned us. She left me alone with a sick child I cannot afford to save. The insurance company denied the experimental treatments because of the genetic marker." He dropped to his knees right in the middle of the grocery store. Shoppers paused, staring at the display. "I was so wrong, Chloe," Marcus sobbed, trying to reach for my hand. "I threw away the best thing that ever happened to me. We built an 8-year history together. You have a good heart. I know you do. You have built this incredibly successful design firm. Your company is worth millions now. If you just sell your business or take out a commercial loan against it, you could give me the cash to save my baby. We can start over. Please save us." I stared down at the man I had pledged my life to. He was not apologizing for destroying me. He was apologizing because he had run out of money and needed a new host to drain. He expected me to liquidate the empire I built from the ashes he left me in, just to clean up his catastrophic mess. "Get up," I demanded, pulling my hand away in disgust. "Your audacity is limitless. You discarded me because I could not give you a perfect, healthy heir. Now you want me to sacrifice my livelihood to fund the consequences of your betrayal." Marcus scrambled to his feet, his desperation twisting into ugly resentment when he realized I was not going to play the gracious savior. "You owe me," Marcus hissed, stepping into my personal space. "You only have that business because I supported you for years while you failed to be a wife. You are nothing without the foundation I gave you." I did not hesitate. I raised my hand and slapped him across the face with every ounce of strength I possessed. The sharp crack echoed through the grocery aisle. Marcus staggered backward, clutching his reddening cheek in shock. "I built my empire despite you, not because of you," I stated, my voice echoing with power. I unbuttoned my heavy winter coat, letting it fall open to fully reveal the shape of my pregnant body. And for the record, I am not a defective machine. I am 6 months pregnant with twin boys. Marcus stared at my stomach, his eyes wide with disbelief. The reality that I was flourishing in every aspect he claimed I was worthless in completely broke his mind. His shock morphed into a bitter sneer. He noticed Elias walking through the sliding glass doors of the grocery store, wearing his usual worn boots and faded jacket, coming to help me carry the bags. Marcus let out a cruel laugh that sounded hysterical. "You are pregnant with his kids. You left a corporate executive to breed with a broke pensioner living in a wooden shack in the woods. Look at his dusty boots. You are pathetic, Chloe. You will die in poverty with that dirty ex-cop." Marcus sneered one last time, turned on his heel, and stalked out of the grocery store. He pushed through the sliding glass doors, practically throwing himself into his beat-up sedan. He sped out of the parking lot, his tires squealing against the damp asphalt, a pathetic display of a man entirely broken by his own arrogance. I stood frozen in the produce aisle, my breathing heavy, my hand still stinging from the slap. Elias approached me with slow, measured steps. He did not ask what had happened. He gently took the grocery basket from my trembling fingers and set it on the floor. He pulled a clean cloth from the pocket of his worn jacket, carefully wiping the dirt from his hands. His dark eyes were fixed on the doors where Marcus had just disappeared. "Are you all right?" Elias asked, his voice a low, soothing rumble that instantly calmed my frantic heart. I nodded, taking a deep breath. "I am fine. He is a desperate, pathetic man looking for someone to drain. I will not let him near us ever again." Elias reached out, cupping my cheek with his warm hand. His thumb gently stroked my skin. "No, he will not," Elias stated with absolute chilling certainty. "Because by tomorrow morning he will not even have the bus fare to get across town." I furrowed my brow, confused by the finality in his tone. Before I could ask what he meant, Elias reached into the inner pocket of his faded flannel jacket. Instead of his usual scuffed cell phone, he pulled out a sleek, heavy-duty satellite phone. It was highly encrypted, looking like a piece of advanced military technology. It was entirely out of place in the hands of a simple, retired local sheriff. Elias pressed a single button. The call connected instantly. He lifted the device to his ear, his posture shifting from relaxed protector to apex predator. The rugged, quiet lumberjack vanished. In his place stood a man radiating terrifying corporate authority. "Playtime is over," Elias commanded, his voice sharp, ruthless, and devoid of mercy. "Initiate the hostile takeover of Apex Real Estate immediately. Trigger the penalty clauses on Jamal's commercial loans and freeze their assets. As for Marcus, liquidate every corporate bond holding his debt. Call in the markers, bleed them dry, leave them with absolutely nothing." He ended the call, slipping the device back into his pocket with practiced ease. I stared at him in pure shock. My mind raced frantically, trying to process the impossible commands. Hostile takeover. Liquidating corporate bonds. Apex Real Estate was a massive development firm. Marcus's corporate debt was held by elite investment banks. How could a retired police officer command the destruction of two massive financial portfolios with a single phone call? "Elias?" I breathed, stepping back. "Who did you call?" "What does that mean?" "Who are you?" Elias looked at me, the ruthless corporate predator melting away, leaving only the devoted man who had built cribs for my sons. He reached for my hands, holding them tightly. "Chloe, there is a lot about my past that I need to explain. I will tell you everything. But I needed you to know that the people who hurt you will never be able to touch you again. I am not just a sheriff." Before he could finish, a sudden blinding agony ripped through my lower abdomen. The pain was so intense it completely knocked the breath from my lungs. A sharp gasp escaped my lips. I bent forward, clutching my pregnant belly as my knees buckled. Elias caught me before I hit the floor. He wrapped his strong arms securely around my waist, supporting my entire weight. The shock of his true identity vanished, replaced by a primal, terrifying panic. "Chloe," Elias shouted, his calm demeanor shattering. "Talk to me. Where is the pain?" "It is too early," I sobbed, gripping the fabric of his flannel shirt as another vicious contraction ripped through my body. "The babies. It is too early. I am only 6 months along." This was a high-risk twin pregnancy. The doctors had explicitly warned me about the dangers of premature labor. The intense stress of the encounter with Marcus, combined with the lingering adrenaline of the past few weeks, had pushed my body past its breaking point. I felt a sudden rush of warm fluid soak through my clothes. My water had just broken right there in the middle of the grocery store aisle. Elias did not hesitate for a fraction of a second. He swept me into his arms, lifting me effortlessly against his chest. He carried me out of the sliding glass doors, ignoring the shocked stares of the remaining shoppers and store employees. The cold air hit my face, but the agonizing contractions demanded all my focus. He placed me carefully in the passenger seat of his truck, reclining the seat backward to ease the pressure on my spine. He slammed the door, sprinted around the hood, and jumped into the driver's seat. He turned the key and the heavy engine roared to life. "Hold on, sweetheart," Elias urged, his jaw set in a line of grim determination. Just keep breathing. Focus on me. He threw the truck into gear and sped out of the parking lot. The tires gripped the asphalt as we tore down the rural highway. Every bump sent a fresh wave of agony through my pelvis. The municipal clinic is just 2 miles down the road, I gasped, pointing toward the intersection. Turn left here. No, Elias stated firmly, keeping the steering wheel locked straight ahead. We are bypassing the clinic. They are not equipped for a premature twin delivery. We are going straight to Thorne Medical Center. My eyes flew open. Thorne Medical Center was the most exclusive elite private hospital facility in the state. We would be rejected at the gate. Do not worry about the cost, Chloe, Elias commanded. I completely own the building. I stared at him, my mind unable to process the magnitude of his words through the blinding haze of my contractions. Owns the building. Thorne Medical Center was a billion-dollar fortress of elite healthcare. Another violent wave of pain seized my body, forcing my eyes shut as I gripped the door handle. Elias drove with terrifying precision. The massive tires of his battered pickup truck roared against the slick pavement, eating up the miles between the rural highway and the heart of the city. He did not pull into the standard emergency room bay. Instead, Elias bypassed the main entrance, completely steering the loud, mud-covered truck directly onto the pristine, heated marble driveway, reserved strictly for VYP patients and executive board members. A team of uniformed valets rushed forward, waving their hands frantically to wave off the unauthorized vehicle. Elias slammed the truck into park, killed the engine, and kicked his door open before they could even utter a word of protest. He sprinted around the hood, pulling my door open and lifting me into his arms. I buried my face into his flannel jacket, gasping for air, as my body prepared to bring my sons into the world months too early. Elias carried me through the glass doors and into the expansive main lobby. The interior of Thorne Medical Center looked more like a luxury resort than a hospital. The floors were polished Italian marble, and soft classical music played from hidden speakers. But the serene atmosphere was suddenly shattered by a voice echoing across the expansive lobby. I cannot believe you are denying this application. My brother is a chief financial officer. We are prominent real estate developers. I forced my eyes open, turning my head toward the sound. Standing mere yards away from us were Marcus, Rachel, and Jamal. They looked completely unraveled. Marcus was clutching a stack of medical bills, his face pale and slick with panicked sweat. Jamal was aggressively pointing his finger at a stoic financial administrator, while Rachel pounded her manicured fist on the marble counter. They were begging. Marcus's frozen assets and Jamal's sudden corporate bankruptcy had left them entirely unable to pay the exorbitant upfront fees required to save Marcus's sick child. The financial administrator maintained a polite posture. I apologize, sir, but your accounts are currently frozen under a federal hold. We cannot approve a charity grant for individuals facing active corporate fraud investigations. You will need to transfer to a public county facility. Rachel let out a sound of outrage. She spun around desperately, looking for someone to unleash her fury upon. That was when her manicured finger froze mid-air. Her furious eyes locked directly onto me, resting securely in Elias's arms, my face pale and contorted in labor pain. For a fraction of a second, sneer twisted her features. She saw my swollen belly, my obvious distress, and Elias wearing his dusty work boots and faded flannel shirt, standing in the center of a billionaire's hospital. She marched across the polished marble floor, her high heels clicking aggressively, drawing the attention of every wealthy patient and high-level administrator in the lobby. She pointed directly at Elias, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "What are you doing here?" Rachel screamed, her voice shrill and dripping with venom. "This hospital does not take cheap blue-collar insurance." I groaned in agony, burying my face tighter against Elias's chest as another contraction ripped through me. Elias did not stop walking. He ignored her, his eyes focused entirely on the executive triage desk ahead. His dismissal only infuriated Rachel more. She stepped directly into our path, forcing Elias to halt. Jamal and Marcus hurried over, their eyes widening when they realized who Rachel was screaming at. Marcus stared at my stomach, his face contorting with a mix of bitter resentment and utter humiliation. "You think you can just walk in here and beg for charity?" Rachel shrieked, waving her arms frantically. "My brother is a corporate executive, and even we have to jump through hoops. You are just a broke retired cop living in a wooden shack. They are not going to give you free medical care just because your barren wife finally managed to get knocked up. Get out of here before security throws you out on the street." Jamal sneered, crossing his arms over his wrinkled suit. "The lumberjack thinks he can afford a VIP delivery room. You probably cannot even afford the parking fee outside." Marcus stepped forward, his eyes burning with toxic pride. "I told you, Chloe. I told you that you would die in poverty. Now look at you begging for scraps in a hospital you have no right to be inside." I gasped for air, the physical pain of labor clashing with the sheer audacity of their cruelty. They were actively drowning in their own financial ruin, yet they still desperately clung to the illusion that they were superior to the rugged man holding me. Elias did not yell. He did not defend himself. He simply looked down at Rachel, Jamal, and Marcus with an expression of absolute chilling indifference. It was the look a predator gives to an insect right before crushing it underfoot. "Step aside," Elias commanded. His voice was not loud, but it carried a lethal, vibrating authority that caused the surrounding security guards to immediately freeze in their tracks. Rachel let out a loud, mocking laugh. "Or what? You are going to arrest us. You are nobody. You are absolute trash." Before Rachel could utter another toxic syllable, a loud, synchronized click echoed across the massive lobby. The heavy frosted glass doors of the exclusive executive wing suddenly unlocked and swung wide open. The chaotic noise of the hospital lobby vanished. The murmurs of the patients, the clicking of keyboards, and the aggressive shouts of my former family ceased entirely. The entire lobby falls dead silent as the heavy glass doors of the executive wing swing open. 15 elite medical professionals in white coats sprinted from the restricted corridor. Leading them was the hospital director himself. Their sheer urgency caused the hospital staff to step back in awe. Rachel, blinded by entitlement, assumed this reception was related to her earlier screaming. She stepped forward forcefully, shoving Marcus toward the approaching doctors. Finally, Rachel declared with arrogant satisfaction, "Someone with actual authority. My brother is a corporate executive and his child suffers from a genetic condition. We demand access to your top specialists." The hospital director did not blink. He did not slow down. He did not offer Rachel a single glance. They were entirely invisible, mere dust motes floating in the pristine air. The medical team swept past them, their focus locked entirely on the man holding me. Marcus stumbled backward as the doctors formed a precise semicircular formation around Elias. The entire lobby held its collective breath. Then, displaying profound respect that defied everything my ex-husband knew about wealth, the director and his team bowed. "Mr. Thorne," the director announced, his voice carrying absolute, unwavering reverence. "We received your secure transmission. The VIP penthouse maternity wing has been locked down exclusively for your wife. Our top neonatal specialists, the chief of obstetrics, and 2 surgical teams are standing by. We are ready to move." The name echoed off the marble walls, striking Marcus and Rachel with the devastating force of a blow. "Thorne." Rachel let out a strangled gasp. The blood drained rapidly from her face. She stumbled sideways, grabbing Jamal's arm to keep from collapsing. Marcus stood entirely paralyzed, his eyes wide and vacant, his jaw hanging open in horror. He looked up at the massive gilded letters mounted above the reception desk, Thorne Medical Center. The rugged flannel-wearing man who chopped wood in the forest was Elias Thorne. He was the sole billionaire heir to the most powerful medical empire in the country. A violent contraction ripped through my abdomen, pulling a sharp cry from my lips. Elias tightened his grip around me, pressing a swift kiss to my forehead before shifting his attention back to the medical team. The quiet lumberjack was gone. In his place stood the ruthless chief executive of a multi-billion-dollar dynasty. "Her water broke 40 minutes ago." Elias ordered, his voice echoing with corporate authority. This is a high-risk twin pregnancy at 24 weeks. Her blood pressure has been fluctuating due to acute environmental stress. I want a crash cart ready in the suite, and Dr. Eris assigned as lead anesthesiologist. Move her now. Understood, the director responded, signaling for a transport gurney. We will not waste a second. As Elias lowered me onto the gurney, the missing puzzle pieces of his past clicked into place. The local rumors about him being a retired sheriff were a convenient cover story. He retreated to that isolated wooden cabin to escape the suffocating noise of the corporate boardroom and the glare of the paparazzi. He went into self-imposed exile following a devastating tragedy years ago, choosing the rhythm of chopping wood to heal his fractured soul. He lived in complete isolation until I showed up in the pouring rain, broken and discarded. I brought him back to life, and in return he handed me the keys to a kingdom I never knew existed. I turned my head on the pillow, fighting through waves of physical pain, and looked directly at the people who tried to destroy me. Marcus looked like his brain had completely short-circuited. He was hyperventilating, taking frantic gasps of air as he stared at the elite doctors hovering around the woman he threw away like garbage. He had brought his pregnant mistress to an anniversary dinner, proudly boasting that he was securing a flawless legacy. Now he stood in the lobby of a hospital he could not afford, begging for charity, while the woman he called a defective machine was treated like royalty by the owner of the building. Rachel was shaking violently, covering her mouth with her trembling hands. The staggering realization of her own catastrophic mistake was visibly crushing her. She had just screamed insults at a billionaire mocking his clothes, and his insurance entirely unaware that he possessed the power to buy and sell her existence with a single signature. Elias stepped away from the gurney for one brief, terrifying moment. He walked slowly toward Marcus, Rachel, and Jamal. The 15 elite doctors parted silently to let him through, their expressions turning instantly hostile toward the trio who dared insult their employer. Elias did not raise his hand. He did not need to shout. He simply stood in front of Marcus, radiating a cold, lethal power that made the air in the lobby feel incredibly thin. Marcus physically cowered, shrinking back against the reception desk, his eyes darting wildly for an escape route that did not exist. You spent 8 years measuring the worth of my wife based on your own pathetic, arrogant limitations. Elias said, his voice dropping to a terrifying quiet pitch that carried effortlessly through the room. You threw her into the dirt, assuming she would simply perish. But you made one catastrophic miscalculation, Marcus. Elias leaned in, his dark eyes locking onto Marcus's terrified face. You forgot that some women do not die in the dirt. They take root, they grow, and they build empires that will eventually swallow you whole. Marcus opened his mouth desperately, trying to form an apology, a plea, any combination of words that could save him from the destruction he invited upon himself. But before a single sound could escape his trembling lips, Elias turned his back on him, dismissing Marcus with the indifference reserved for a squashed insect. Let us go, Elias commanded his medical team, taking his place firmly at my side. My wife has a dynasty to deliver. The heavy executive doors remained open, waiting to welcome us into a world of safety and power. As the medical team began to wheel my gurney toward the pristine executive corridors, a sharp, frantic ringing shattered the silence in the hospital lobby. The sound came from Jamal's pocket. He jolted, pulling out his sleek smartphone with trembling fingers. The caller ID flashed the name of his chief financial officer. Jamal answered the call, his arrogant posture still holding on to the remnants of his shattered pride. What Jamal snapped into the receiver, clearly frustrated by the interruption during his family's collective humiliation. I am dealing with a massive crisis right now. The voice on the other end carried through the quiet marble hall. It was the frantic, high-pitched tone of a man watching his entire livelihood burn to the ground. Jamal's aggressive posture instantly vanished. His broad shoulders slumped, and the color rapidly drained from his face, leaving a sickly ashen gray behind. What do you mean, accounts are frozen? Jamal demanded, his voice cracking with sudden terror. We have commercial lines of credit. We have municipal backing. Whatever the chief financial officer said next caused Jamal's knees to visibly buckle. He reached out and grabbed the edge of the reception desk to keep himself from collapsing onto the polished floor. His eyes widened in absolute horror as the reality of his financial destruction was delivered. A mystery corporate entity had systematically purchased every single commercial loan, private mortgage, and vendor debt belonging to Apex Real Estate. The moment the ink dried on those acquisitions, the buyer exercised an obscure, ruthless penalty clause embedded deep within the original contracts. They recalled the debts in full. The buyer demanded total liquidation. Jamal did not have 30 days to find new investors. He did not have a week to liquidate assets. The banks were aggressively seizing his active construction sites, his corporate headquarters, and his personal properties right at that very moment. His Apex Real Estate was officially bankrupt. Jamal lowered the phone from his ear. His hand trembled so violently that the expensive device slipped from his grasp, crashing against the hard marble floor. The screen cracked, reflecting his ruined empire. Rachel grabbed his arm, frantically shaking him, demanding to know what had just happened. Jamal did not even look at his wife. He did not look at Marcus, who was still cowering near the entrance. Jamal slowly lifted his head, his terrified, bloodshot eyes locking directly onto Elias. The memories of their encounter in my design studio crashed into Jamal's mind. He had proudly threatened to crush my business. He had mocked Elias's faded clothes and warned him that he had no idea who he was messing with. Jamal remembered Elias's chilling smirk and his instruction to keep that energy. Then the realization of what must have happened hit him. The single phone call Elias had just made. The command to initiate a hostile takeover and bleed them dry. The man Jamal had arrogantly dismissed as a broke rural handyman was the apex predator of the corporate world. Elias possessed the terrifying power to dismantle a multi-million-dollar conglomerate in under an hour, all while shopping for fresh vegetables. You. Jamal gasped, his voice a pathetic, wheezing whisper. He took a stumbling step forward, reaching his hands out toward the executive doors. You did this. You bought the debt. You bankrupted my company. Jamal's previous arrogance evaporated into sheer, pathetic desperation. He fell directly to his knees on the marble floor, completely abandoning his dignity. Please, Mr. Thorne! Jamal shouted, his voice echoing with absolute panic. You cannot do this to me. I have investors. I have millions tied up in the waterfront project. I will lose my home. I will lose everything. Please call off the banks. I will give Chloe the land. I will give her whatever she wants. Elias did not even turn his head. He did not offer Jamal a single glance of acknowledgement, pity, or triumph. To Elias Thorne, Jamal was less than nothing. He was a minor administrative task that had already been permanently resolved. Elias's entire universe was focused exclusively on me. As another agonizing contraction gripped my body, I let out a sharp cry, my fingers digging desperately into his large, calloused hand. Elias stepped closer to the gurney, his broad shoulders shielding me from the chaotic, pathetic display of my former relatives. He leaned down, brushing a damp strand of hair from my sweating forehead. Look right at me, Chloe, Elias murmured softly, his voice an anchor in the storm of my physical pain. Breathe with me. You are safe now. I have you. Nobody is ever going to hurt you or our sons again. The medical team moved flawlessly around us, adjusting intravenous lines and preparing the transport monitors. The hospital director walked beside the gurney, maintaining a respectful distance, while ensuring the pathway to the private elevators remained completely clear. The heavy security detail surrounding the executive wing stepped forward, forming an impenetrable human wall between my moving gurney and the sobbing, frantic figures of Marcus, Rachel, and Jamal. Please, Jamal wailed from the floor, attempting to crawl past the security guards. Rachel finally understood the magnitude of their ruin and burst into hysterical, uncontrollable tears, clinging to her husband's ruined suit. Marcus simply stood frozen in the background, a hollow shell of a man watching his last desperate hope for a medical charity grant evaporate into thin air. I kept my eyes locked on Elias, matching my rapid breathing to the steady quiet, calming rise and fall of his chest. The heavy frosted glass doors of the executive wing hissed softly as they began to slide shut. The frantic screams of my former brother-in-law and the hysterical sobs of my former sister-in-law faded into a muffled, pathetic background noise. The heavy doors finally clicked shut and locked firmly into place, permanently separating my bright, protected future from the absolute destruction they had brought upon themselves. Even as the heavy frosted doors sealed us inside the executive corridor, the show in the main lobby was far from over. I lay on the gurney, breathing through the fading peak of another contraction, while Elias walked beside me toward the VIP elevator. He stopped for a fraction of a second. Without turning his head, Elias raised his right hand and snapped his fingers. It was a sharp, authoritative sound that echoed down the hallway. On the other side of the glass partition, a towering man in a tailored suit stepped forward. This was the head of his private security detail, a man who had remained invisible in the background until this exact moment. He walked directly toward the weeping, pathetic mess that was my former family. Through the soundproof glass, I could clearly see the security chief approach Jamal. Jamal was still kneeling on the marble floor, paralyzed by the realization of his sudden financial ruin. The security chief did not speak a word. He simply reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a thick manila folder. He dropped it onto the floor between Jamal and his trembling hands. The thud of the folder seemed to shake Jamal from his stupor. Jamal hesitated, his bloodshot eyes darting around the room before his fingers tore the folder open. Out spilled a cascade of high-definition photographs and financial documents scattering across the floor. From my vantage point, I knew exactly what those papers contained. Elias had promised to handle the corrupt inspector who shut down my garden project, and Elias Thorne never made empty promises. He had not just ordered a financial takeover of Jamal and his company. He had deployed his elite investigative team to dissect every dirty secret Jamal thought he had buried. The glossy photographs clearly showed Jamal sitting in a dimly lit booth at a local downtown diner. In the pictures, Jamal was sliding a thick envelope full of cash across the table, directly to the exact same municipal building inspector who had aggressively shut down my 50-acre eco-therapeutic garden project. Next to those damning photos were printed wire transfer receipts and highly encrypted offshore banking logs. His team had successfully traced the bribe money directly from Jamal and his hidden corporate accounts straight into the inspector and his personal family trust. The evidence was absolutely irrefutable. It was a perfectly documented trail of corruption, illegal bribery, and malicious corporate sabotage. Jamal stared down at the glossy photos, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish pulled from the water. The color drained from his face for a second time. He realized instantly that the aggressive destruction of his real estate empire was only the beginning of his punishment. He had foolishly crossed a billionaire, and that billionaire had just meticulously handed him a one-way ticket to a federal penitentiary. Right on cue, the shrill, piercing wail of police sirens erupted from the busy city street right outside the hospital. The deafening noise cut through the tension in the lobby. Flashing red and blue emergency lights reflected wildly against the towering glass windows of the medical center entrance. Rachel scrambled backward on the floor, her tear-streaked face twisting in pure confusion as heavy, aggressive footsteps pounded up the concrete entrance ramp. The main automatic lobby doors flew open, and a specialized squad of heavily armed federal agents strode into the hospital. They wore dark tactical vests bearing the letters FBI and carried an air of absolute uncompromising authority. They did not stop at the reception desk. They did not ask for directions. They marched in a straight, unwavering line directly toward Jamal. Marcus practically threw himself against the marble wall to get out of their way, terrified of being caught in the destructive crossfire of Jamal and his arrest. The lead agent pulled out a gold badge, his voice booming across the quiet, luxurious lobby. He announced loudly that Jamal was being placed under immediate federal arrest for multiple felony counts of corporate fraud, extortion, and bribing a municipal government official. Rachel let out a blood-curdling hysterical scream that echoed painfully off the high ceilings. She lunged forward, desperately grabbing the lead agent and his arm. She sobbed hysterically, shouting that there must be a massive mistake, that her husband was a wealthy real estate developer, that they were important citizens who did not belong in handcuffs. The agents ignored her completely, treating her frantic protests like annoying background noise. Two stern federal agents hauled Jamal roughly to his feet, forcefully twisting his arms behind his back. The sharp metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs, locking securely around his wrists, echoed across the lobby. It was undeniably the most satisfying sound I had ever heard in my entire life. Jamal did not fight back. He offered absolutely zero physical resistance to the arresting officers. He simply hung his head in ultimate crushing defeat. He was a broken, bankrupt criminal being humiliated and dragged away in front of the city and its most elite doctors and wealthy patients. Rachel collapsed onto the hard floor, wailing uncontrollably as she watched her luxurious lifestyle evaporate entirely into the back of a federal squad car. Her designer clothes and expensive jewelry could not save her from the absolute ruin she had invited into her life. Marcus stood utterly paralyzed against the wall, watching the devastating downfall of the people he had proudly aligned himself with. The gleaming silver doors of the VIP elevator chimed softly, sliding open to welcome us. Elias gently pushed my medical gurney inside the spacious mirrored cabin. He looked down at me, his dark eyes filled with absolute adoration and fiercely protective warmth. The chaos, the federal arrests, and the screaming relatives were left entirely behind us, locked away in a pathetic world that could no longer reach me. The elevator doors closed smoothly, and we began our rapid ascent toward the penthouse suite, carrying me safely toward home. Just as the silver doors of the VIP elevator began to slide shut, a desperate blur of motion broke through the line of security guards. Marcus, stripped of his corporate pride, threw his body weight forward. He jammed his bruised hands between the closing metal doors, forcing the automated safety sensors to trigger and slide the doors back open. The hospital security team immediately lunged forward to subdue him, gripping his ruined designer suit jacket. Elias raised a single commanding finger, signaling the guards to halt for a fraction of a second. He wanted to see exactly how low my ex-husband was willing to sink. Marcus did not stand up. He collapsed onto his knees at the threshold of the elevator, blocking our path to the penthouse suite. The arrogant chief financial officer, who had mercilessly thrown me out into the freezing rain, was completely gone forever. In his place was a pathetic shell of a man sobbing uncontrollably onto the pristine marble floor. He looked up at Elias, his face slick with cold sweat and desperate tears. "Please, Mr. Thorne!" Marcus begged, his voice cracking into a high-pitched, hysterical whine that echoed through the lobby. "Please, I am begging you on my hands and knees. I have nothing left to give. My bank accounts are frozen. My credit is entirely destroyed." Brittany took whatever cash was hidden in the house and abandoned me the second she realized the wealth was gone. "The doctors say my baby will die without these specialized surgeries, and the hospital administration refuses to admit us without a massive cash deposit. You ruthlessly bought all my corporate debt. You brutally took away everything I spent my entire life building. I know you have the power to fix this instantly. Just grant me a charity waiver. Just sign one single piece of paper authorizing the pediatric surgeons to operate on my sick child. I will do anything you want. I will work for you for free for the rest of my natural life. Please. You cannot let an innocent child suffer because of my personal and financial ruin." Elias stood perfectly still, his broad shoulders shielding my medical gurney like an impenetrable fortress wall. He stared directly down at Marcus with an unyielding expression of absolute terrifying apathy. Elias did not see a desperate father pleading for salvation. He saw the ruthless monster who had emotionally tortured the woman he loved. When begging Elias yielded zero reaction, Marcus desperately shifted his bloodshot eyes toward me. "Chloe, please," Marcus sobbed, crawling one agonizing inch closer on his bruised knees. "I know I was a monster to you. I know I made the absolute biggest, most catastrophic mistake of my entire life when I handed you those divorce papers. But we have 8 years of history together. 8 years of marriage, Chloe. We shared a home. We shared holidays. We truly loved each other once. You have the kindest, most forgiving heart of anyone I have ever met. You used to rescue stray animals and build beautiful gardens to heal the earth. Please look deep down into that beautiful heart of yours and find some mercy for me now. Do not let my innocent baby die just because I completely failed you as a husband. Talk to him, Chloe. Tell him to grant the medical waiver. You are the only one on this planet who can save us. You owe it to the 8 years we spent building a life together. I looked down at the pathetic man kneeling in the dirt of his own making. The intense physical pain of my active labor faded into the background, replaced by a sudden surge of pure, icy clarity. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. I did not feel any lingering anger or resentment. I felt nothing but absolute freezing indifference. I propped myself up on my elbows, forcing him to look me directly in the eyes. I wanted him to clearly see the immense, unyielding power radiating from every single inch of my body. You dare to weaponize our 8 years of history? I asked, my voice echoing with lethal razor-sharp precision through the silent lobby. For 8 years, you isolated me. You manipulated my emotions. For 8 years, you called me garbage because I could not give you a child. You threw a $5,000 check in my face and explicitly told me I was a defective machine. You evicted me in a rainstorm so you could move your pregnant mistress into my home. You told me I would die in poverty. Now I desperately want you to look closely, Marcus. Look directly at me. I am about to birth 2 heirs to the empire you are currently begging for scraps from. Marcus's mouth fell wide open, his eyes expanding in pure, devastating horror as the absolute finality of my words struck him. He realized in that agonizing second that he had foolishly thrown away the undisputed queen of a billion-dollar dynasty. Suddenly, a massive, unbearable contraction ripped through my pelvis with unprecedented violence. A secondary, terrifying gush of warm fluid broke completely, instantly soaking the hospital sheets. The medical monitors attached to my gurney began to beep wildly, signaling extreme distress. It was finally time. The babies were coming right now. Elias did not hesitate for another single millisecond. He stepped forward and planted his heavy, dust-covered work boot squarely against Marcus's chest. With a sudden, forceful kick, Elias launched Marcus backward. Marcus flew across the polished marble floor, sliding aggressively until his back slammed hard against the reception desk. Elias reached down, sweeping me up into his strong arms, pulling me tight against his chest. He turned his broad back on the pathetic, broken man, weeping alone on the cold floor, and stepped fully into the waiting VIP elevator. The heavy silver doors slid completely shut with a soft, final click, permanently sealing Marcus's sobbing face behind us. The elevator ascended with a smooth, silent velocity that made my stomach drop. Elias held me securely against his broad chest, his heart beating in a steady, reassuring rhythm against my cheek. I squeezed my eyes shut as another wave of agonizing pain radiated through my lower back, but the sheer panic that had gripped me in the grocery store was entirely gone. I was enveloped in an impenetrable bubble of absolute security. The elevator chimed softly, and the silver doors glided open to reveal the penthouse maternity suite. It was a staggering departure from the chaotic, sterile environment of a typical hospital ward. Soft, ambient lighting illuminated warm mahogany wall panels and pristine marble floors. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking panoramic view of the entire city skyline. It looked exactly like a five-star luxury hotel, but hidden behind the elegant wood paneling was the most advanced medical technology on the entire planet. A dedicated team of nurses in crisp scrubs immediately rushed forward, guiding my transport gurney into the master delivery suite. The sheer contrast hit me with the physical force of a tidal wave. I vividly remembered standing in the freezing rain 8 months ago, clutching a cheap piece of luggage, shivering uncontrollably, while Marcus aggressively locked me out of my own home. I had been utterly destitute, brutally discarded, because my body was deemed inadequate by a ruthless family. Now I was resting on a heated, custom-designed birthing bed, surrounded by 15 elite medical specialists who treated me with absolute reverence. Elias refused to leave my side for even a fraction of a second. He stood firmly planted next to the bed, gripping my hand so tightly I could feel the rough, familiar calluses on his palms. The chief of obstetrics, a brilliant woman with decades of high-risk delivery experience, quickly assessed my fluctuating vitals and the rapid fetal heart monitors. The pain intensified drastically, blurring the edges of my vision, but the medical team operated with flawless, synchronized precision. They administered specialized medications to stabilize my blood pressure and protect the twins from the stress of a premature delivery. Elias leaned down, pressing his warm forehead directly against mine. He spoke in a low, grounding murmur, telling me how incredibly strong I was, how much he loved me, and how we were going to meet our sons in just a few short moments. His unwavering confidence became my absolute anchor in the violent storm of physical agony. Time lost all meaning as I pushed through the exhausting, grueling process of active labor. The room was a whirlwind of focused medical energy, but I only looked at Elias. His dark eyes locked onto mine, radiating a fierce, protective love that gave me the exact physical strength I desperately needed. Then, piercing the tense atmosphere of the delivery suite, a loud, magnificent cry echoed through the large room. The first baby boy arrived immediately, followed by the strong, healthy cries of his twin brother. Despite being born prematurely, they were remarkably robust, their tiny lungs filling the luxurious suite with the undeniably beautiful sound of new life. The elite neonatal specialists quickly swarmed the infants, conducting rapid assessments with state-of-the-art medical equipment. The chief obstetrician turned to us with a brilliant, relieved smile, announcing that both boys were breathing perfectly on their own and displaying excellent vital signs. The heavy, suffocating fear that had plagued my entire high-risk pregnancy instantly vanished into thin air. The medical team meticulously cleaned the babies and wrapped them in soft, heated blankets. A smiling nurse gently placed the tiny bundled infants directly into Elias's large, capable arms. The ruthless corporate titan who had just bankrupted a massive real estate empire with a single satellite phone call was completely undone. Elias fell directly to his knees beside my hospital bed. Tears streamed freely down his rugged face, tracking through the dust and dirt he still wore from his morning working in the garden. He looked down at the two tiny lives resting securely against his broad chest, then looked up at me with overwhelming, unfiltered devotion. He pressed his wet cheek against my shoulder, his voice thick with raw emotion. "You gave me my life back, Chloe," Elias whispered, his massive shoulders shaking with silent, happy sobs. "I swear to you on my very soul, no one will ever make you feel small again. I will tear down the entire world before I let anyone disrespect the mother of my children ever again." The medical team quietly and respectfully withdrew to the outer periphery of the massive suite, giving us the intimate privacy we desperately needed. They transferred the twins into highly advanced climate-controlled bassinets, positioned right next to my bed, ensuring they received the absolute best neonatal care available on Earth, while remaining within arm's reach. The chaotic noise of the outside world, the dramatic federal arrests, the screaming relatives, and the total financial ruin of my enemies felt like they belonged to a completely different universe. In this ultra-luxurious penthouse, there was nothing but profound peace. Elias slowly stood up carefully, setting aside his heavy flannel jacket. He climbed onto the edge of the wide, comfortable hospital bed, wrapping his strong arms around me and pulling me tightly against his side. I rested my exhausted head on his chest, listening to the steady, calming thump of his heartbeat. The faint scent of pine and wood smoke still clung to his skin, a comforting reminder of the quiet, isolated cabin where our extraordinary journey had initially begun. We sat together in the dim, warm light of the suite, watching our newborn sons sleep soundly in their bassinets. I reached out gently, tracing the strong line of Elias's jaw, marveling at the incredible man who had chosen me when I had absolutely nothing to offer but a broken heart. He leaned down, capturing my lips in a slow, incredibly tender kiss that communicated everything words could not convey. It was a promise of eternal safety, a vow of unwavering loyalty and the ultimate seal on our hard-won victory. I closed my eyes, sinking deep into the profound warmth of his embrace. The defective machine Marcus had cruelly discarded was gone forever. In her place was a queen surrounded by her heirs, ruling a vast empire of love and impenetrable security, alongside a king who worshipped the very ground she walked upon. The long nightmare was finally over. We had definitively won. The seasons shifted, carrying us away from that winter. Elias and I spent the next month settling into the joy of raising our twin boys in our restored farmhouse. Meanwhile, the destructive shockwaves of that night continued to decimate the people who had tried to ruin us. Fueled by the limitless resources of a furious billionaire and irrefutable evidence, justice moved with terrifying clinical precision. 6 months after my sons took their first breaths, I sat quietly in the back row of a sterile federal courtroom. Wearing a tailored gray suit, I sat beside Elias. His arm rested casually across my wooden bench. We were not there to gloat. We were simply there to witness the final closing of a very ugly chapter. Jamal sat at the defense table, looking absolutely unrecognizable. The arrogant real estate tycoon who once aggressively parked his black Porsche over my freshly planted flower beds was completely gone. Wearing a baggy orange jail jumpsuit, his posture slumped under the crushing weight of his impending doom. His expensive haircut had grown unkempt, and his eyes remained fixed firmly on the scuffed linoleum floor. He lacked the courage to turn around and look at us. The federal judge adjusted his reading glasses and looked down from the high mahogany bench. He reviewed the thick stack of financial documents, wire transfer receipts, and surveillance photographs that Elias's security team had meticulously compiled and handed directly to the federal prosecutors. The evidence of Jamal bribing a municipal inspector to falsely sabotage my ecotherapeutic garden project was completely airtight. The judge did not mince his words. He aggressively condemned Jamal's blatant disregard for the law, highlighting how his ruthless greed had corrupted local government offices and endangered legitimate, environmentally sustainable businesses. The gavel fell with a loud, definitive crack that echoed sharply across the quiet courtroom. Jamal was officially sentenced to 5 consecutive years in a maximum security federal penitentiary with absolutely no possibility of early parole. He was also ordered to pay massive financial restitution to the city and the private investors he had systematically defrauded over the past decade. 2 heavily armed federal marshals immediately stepped forward, grabbing Jamal by his arms and hauling him to his feet. The sharp click of the steel handcuffs, locking securely around his wrists, resonated through the room. Jamal finally turned his head as the marshals dragged him toward the holding cell doors. His defeated, bloodshot eyes met mine for a fraction of a second. I did not smile. I did not flinch. I just stared back at him with the freezing, absolute indifference of a woman who had entirely outgrown his pathetic existence. The heavy wooden doors slammed shut permanently, locking Jamal away in a cold steel cage. With Jamal's criminal conviction finalized, the federal government immediately initiated the aggressive seizure of his remaining assets to satisfy the massive restitution orders. The rapid financial dismantling of his fraudulent real estate empire was absolutely absolute and brutally efficient. Federal agents simultaneously descended upon every single property bank account and safety deposit box associated with his name. Rachel, who had spent her entire adult life cruelly mocking the working class and defining her self-worth entirely through her immense stolen wealth, was completely blindsided by the sheer speed of her catastrophic ruin. She was lounging by the pristine infinity pool of her sprawling suburban mansion when the federal agents marched right through her heavily fortified iron gates. They handed her an official eviction notice and gave her exactly 2 hours to pack a single suitcase of basic necessities before permanently locking her out of the estate. Everything she valued was aggressively ripped away from her. The federal government seized and auctioned off her fleet of luxury sports cars, her extensive collection of diamond jewelry, and every single one of her rare custom-made designer handbags. The banks completely zeroed out her platinum credit cards. Her wealthy, superficial friends instantly stopped returning her desperate phone calls, treating her like a contagious disease they needed to avoid at all costs. The country club unceremoniously canceled her membership, and the elite social circles she had proudly dominated violently rejected her presence. She went from living in a multi-million-dollar mansion to possessing absolutely nothing in a matter of 48 hours. With no money, no marketable skills, and a husband sitting in a federal prison, Rachel was forcefully thrown into the exact same brutal reality she had always mocked me for enduring. She was desperately forced to rent a cramped, filthy room in a run-down, roach-infested motel on the absolute worst side of the city. The peeling wallpaper and flickering neon signs outside her window became her new permanent reality. To survive and pay her weekly motel rent, the formerly arrogant socialite who once sneered at my calloused hands had to swallow her massive pride and take a grueling minimum wage job. She was hired as a night shift janitor for a massive commercial office building downtown. Every single night while the rest of the city slept, Rachel had to put on a scratchy, oversized gray uniform. She pushed a heavy yellow mop bucket down endless, brightly lit corridors. She spent her nights scrubbing dirty toilets, emptying trash cans filled with discarded coffee cups, and wiping smudges off glass doors. The grueling physical labor quickly broke her delicate manicured hands, leaving them covered in painful blisters and harsh, stinging chemical burns. The cruel, inescapable irony of her new situation was perfectly complete. The deeply arrogant woman who had proudly commanded me to stay in the dirt, the woman who had viciously laughed when I was violently thrown out into the freezing rain with a single cheap suitcase, was now spending her entire life scrubbing the very floors that truly successful people walked all over. She had actively invited absolute destruction into her life, and now she was forcefully compelled to live inside it, completely isolated, deeply humiliated, and permanently, absolutely ruined forever. While Rachel scrubbed dirty floors under harsh fluorescent lights, Marcus faced his own brutal corporate execution. The freezing of his offshore accounts and the federal investigation sent massive shockwaves through his prestigious investment firm. Marcus spent his career cultivating the image of an untouchable chief financial officer. He believed he was invincible, but the moment the federal hold was placed on his assets, the board of directors turned on him with ruthless efficiency. Summoned to the executive boardroom on a rainy Tuesday morning, Marcus expected to negotiate a temporary leave. Instead, he met the entire board and their legal team. They did not offer him a seat. The chairman simply slid a devastating sheet of paper across the polished mahogany table. It was an immediate termination of employment. The board invoked a severe morality clause within his contract. Because Marcus engaged in questionable offshore transfers to hide marital assets now tied to Jamal's fraud case, the firm stripped Marcus of his entire severance package, vested stock options, and corporate pension. He tried to argue, demanding respect for the profit he generated. The chairman simply signaled the room. Two massive security guards stepped forward, grabbing Marcus by his expensive suit. They forcefully marched him right out of the boardroom, paraded him through the trading floor, and shoved him directly out the front doors. He was left standing on the wet sidewalk with absolutely nothing, brutally discarded exactly like I was. With his career completely obliterated, Marcus stumbled back to the luxury condo he illegally purchased for his mistress. He banked on the desperate hope that Brittany would stand by him while he rebuilt. He slowly walked through the front door, the weight of failure crushing his chest, only to find the expansive living room looking like a tornado ripped through it. Drawers were violently yanked open and the expensive artwork was stripped from the walls. Brittany stood in the master bedroom, frantically shoving her designer shoes and expensive jewelry into a massive leather suitcase. The sick infant lay in a nearby bassinet, crying weakly, entirely ignored by his mother. Marcus froze in the doorway, staring at the chaotic scene. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice trembling with panic. "The baby needs medication." Brittany zipped her suitcase shut with a loud pull. She did not even glance at the crying child. "I am leaving, Marcus," Brittany stated coldly, her voice devoid of a single ounce of maternal affection or romantic loyalty. "The bank called this morning. They are foreclosing on this condo by the end of the week. Your accounts are frozen, your credit cards declined, and my offshore account was seized by the court. You have absolutely no money left. Marcus fell to his knees, desperately grabbing the edge of her suitcase. Brittany, please. You cannot just leave me. He is your son. He needs specialized care. We can figure this out together. Brittany let out a sharp, mocking laugh that cut right through his soul. Figure this out. You are bankrupt and unemployed. I signed up for a wealthy corporate executive. I did not sign up to be a broke nurse for a sick child in a cramped apartment. You lied to me. You promised me millions. I am flying out of state tonight and I am never coming back. She ripped her suitcase from his desperate grasp, stepping right over his kneeling body. She walked out the front door, letting it slam shut behind her. She did not look back. She did not leave a forwarding address. She simply vanished, abandoning Marcus completely to face the terrifying, crushing reality of single fatherhood without a single dime to his name. The profound silence of the empty condo was broken only by the weak, continuous cries of the sick infant. Marcus slowly crawled across the hardwood floor, pulling himself up to look into the bassinet. The child required specialized formula, incredibly expensive daily medications, and constant agonizing medical monitoring. The private nurses Brittany had demanded were completely gone, their invoices unpaid. Marcus was entirely alone. The devastating, undeniable truth finally settled into his bones. The flawless, perfect legacy he had arrogantly demanded, the legacy he had destroyed our 8-year marriage to secure, was actually a terrifying, bottomless pit of debt and despair. Over the next several months, the absolute desperation of poverty aggressively dismantled whatever fragile remnants of pride Marcus had left. He was forcefully evicted from the luxury condo and forced to rent a tiny, damp, one-bedroom apartment in a decaying building on the outskirts of the city. Because his professional reputation was utterly destroyed by the corporate scandal and the federal asset freeze, no financial firm in the entire state would even grant him an interview. The crushing medical bills arrived daily, piling up on his cheap kitchen table like a mountain of impending doom. To keep his fragile son alive, Marcus had to systematically sell off every single piece of his former wealthy identity. He slowly walked into a dingy, brightly lit pawn shop and handed over his prized Rolex watch, receiving only a fraction of its true value. He sold his custom-tailored Italian suits to second-hand consignment stores. He surrendered the keys to his sleek sports car to a predatory dealership just to afford a month's supply of the highly specialized baby formula his son desperately needed. Late one night, sitting on a stained mattress in the dark, Marcus meticulously counted a small handful of crumpled dollar bills and loose change. The heating in his extremely cheap apartment had been completely turned off. He wrapped his sick child in his last cashmere sweater, desperately rocking the crying baby back and forth in the freezing darkness. The arrogant, powerful man who had once proudly told me I was a defective machine and confidently promised I would die in poverty was now fiercely weeping into the dark. He was completely broken, utterly destitute, and permanently trapped in a hell of his very own making. Exactly 1 year after the dramatic, terrifying night, my sons were born. The harsh winter of my past was entirely replaced by the brilliant golden sunlight of a new spring. The 50-acre plot of raw land that Elias had handed me on a single sheet of paper had been completely transformed into a breathtaking masterpiece. Today was the official grand opening and ribbon-cutting ceremony for the Thorn Ecological Sanctuary. It was not just a garden. It was a sprawling world-class therapeutic haven designed to integrate advanced medical recovery with the profound healing power of nature. The estate grounds were absolutely unrecognizable. I had poured every ounce of my passion and architectural expertise into the soil. Winding wheelchair-accessible pathways paved with natural stone snaked through lush, blooming botanical sectors. A massive, crystal-clear therapeutic waterfall cascaded down a central stone pavilion designed specifically to reduce anxiety for patients recovering from severe trauma. Glass-enclosed conservatories housed rare medicinal plants, while open-air meditation gardens offered quiet refuge. It was a flawless synergy of Elias's towering medical empire and my deep ecological vision. The grand opening was not a quiet local affair. It was the social and philanthropic event of the decade. The manicured lawns were covered by elegant white event tents. Waiters in crisp black tuxedos circulated through the crowd, carrying silver trays of champagne and delicate hors d'oeuvres. The guest list was a staggering assembly of the most powerful people in the country: celebrities, prominent state politicians, elite medical board directors, and billionaire philanthropists mingled freely among the blooming cherry blossoms. High-profile journalists and camera crews from major national news networks formed a dense wall near the main stage, eager to document the unveiling of the sanctuary. I stood inside the private preparation suite overlooking the main lawn, taking a slow, steady breath. The woman staring back at me in the full-length mirror was a complete stranger to the broken, sobbing wife who had been violently evicted into the freezing rain 2 years ago. I wore a custom-designed floor-length gown of deep emerald green silk. The fabric caught the light with every movement draping elegantly over my completely healed, strong body. I wore no delicate, fragile jewelry. Instead, a single magnificent diamond necklace rested against my collarbone, a quiet anniversary gift from Elias to celebrate the birth of our sons. My hair was styled in sleek cascading waves, and my posture radiated an absolute, unshakable confidence. I was no longer a victim. I was the undisputed queen of a rapidly expanding empire. The heavy wooden door to the suite clicked open. Elias walked in instantly, stealing the breath from my lungs. He had traded his faded flannel shirts and dusty work boots for a meticulously tailored charcoal gray suit. He looked every inch the terrifyingly powerful billionaire titan that he truly was, his broad shoulders filling out the expensive fabric perfectly. But the fierce, intimidating aura he projected to the corporate world instantly melted the second his dark eyes locked onto mine. He was not alone. Securely balanced in his strong arms were our 1-year-old twin boys, Leo and Silas. They were dressed in tiny matching suits, their dark curls perfectly styled, their bright eyes wide with curiosity. They were robust, incredibly healthy, and vibrantly alive. Elias walked across the room and pressed a deep, lingering kiss to my lips, careful not to crush my gown. "You look absolutely breathtaking, Chloe," Elias murmured, his voice thick with raw, overwhelming adoration. "The entire world is waiting out there just to see you." I reached out, gently stroking the soft cheeks of my laughing sons. "I am ready," I replied, my voice steady and resolute. The transition from the private suite to the main event stage was a masterclass in power. As Elias escorted me out of the building and toward the outdoor pavilion, the chaotic murmur of the massive crowd instantly silenced. The sheer magnetism of Elias Thorne walking beside his wife commanded absolute, unwavering respect. He guided me to the edge of the stage, offering an encouraging squeeze to my hand, before taking his seat in the center of the front row, settling the twin boys onto his lap. I stepped up to the crystal podium alone. The moment my hands grasped the edges of the stand, a blinding wave of camera flashes erupted from the media pit. The rapid clicking of shutters sounded like rainfall. I looked out over the sea of incredibly wealthy, powerful faces, but my gaze ultimately rested on Elias and my beautiful sons. "Welcome to the Thorn Ecological Sanctuary." I began, my voice projecting clearly and powerfully through the state-of-the-art sound system. "They say that when a forest burns to the ground, the soil becomes incredibly fertile. The destruction leaves behind the exact nutrients required for new resilient life to take root. 2 years ago, my entire world burned to ashes. I was told I was barren. I was told I was worthless. I was told I would fade away into nothingness." I paused, letting the heavy weight of my words settle over the silent, captivated crowd. But those who try to bury us often forget that we are seeds. We do not die in the dark. We break open. We grow. We push through the dirt, and we reach for the sunlight. This sanctuary is dedicated to every single person who has ever been broken, discarded, or told they were not enough. It is a living, breathing testament to the undeniable fact that healing is always possible, and that true power comes from cultivating life, not destroying it. The crowd erupted into a deafening, thunderous standing ovation. The applause rolled across the massive garden like a physical wave. Billionaires and politicians stood to their feet, clapping furiously. Elias stood up, holding our sons, looking at me with a fierce, burning pride that completely illuminated his face. I stepped away from the podium and accepted the ceremonial silver scissors handed to me by the city mayor. With one swift, decisive motion, I cut the wide green ribbon stretched across the grand entrance of the sanctuary. The velvet ribbon fluttered to the ground, officially opening the gates. The media flashes intensified, capturing the exact moment the discarded wife officially claimed her throne. The sheer vibrant beauty of the sprawling therapeutic garden stood in absolute staggering contrast to the dark, freezing, miserable existence my enemies were currently trapped inside. I had not just survived their cruelty, I had built a paradise directly on top of their ruins. Far beyond the manicured lawns and the flashing cameras, the evening traffic on the rural highway was backing up into a long, glittering line. Marcus gripped the sticky-worn steering wheel of his beat-up compact car, his knuckles turning white from sheer exhaustion and chronic stress. The heater in his vehicle was completely broken, blowing lukewarm, stale air that smelled faintly of cheap vanilla air freshener and spilled coffee. He wore a faded gray polo shirt that hung loosely over his thinning, gaunt frame. It was a stark, depressing departure from the custom-tailored Italian suits he used to casually discard after a single season. The dashboard clock glowed faintly in the dark cabin, mocking him with the harsh reality that he was 14 hours into a grueling, soul-crushing shift. He was driving for a rideshare application, desperately scraping together pennies and single-dollar bills just to afford the specialized medical formula his sick infant required to survive another week. In the back seat of his rattling car, a wealthy venture capitalist sat talking loudly on his cell phone. The passenger was dressed impeccably, boasting arrogantly about a multi-million-dollar corporate merger and aggressively complaining about the slow traffic leading up to the most exclusive social event of the decade. Marcus tuned out the arrogant chatter, his jaw clenching tightly. He used to be exactly like that man. He used to sit in the spacious back seats of luxury town cars, barking demanding orders at terrified subordinates and effortlessly calculating hostile corporate takeovers. Now he was just a nameless, faceless driver, completely invisible to the powerful elite who once begged for his lucrative financial advice. The glowing GPS monitor on his dashboard directed him to turn right, guiding his dented sedan onto a newly paved, beautifully illuminated avenue lined with towering oak trees. The traffic slowed to an agonizing crawl as they finally approached the designated destination. Marcus found himself idling directly between a sleek black limousine and a custom-imported sports car. His high-mileage damaged vehicle stuck out like a glaring offensive insult among the immense staggering wealth surrounding it. He felt a deep familiar pang of bitter suffocating humiliation burn in his chest. Every single luxury car ahead of him was a painful, undeniable reminder of the massive empire he had aggressively and foolishly thrown away. He finally reached the glowing drop-off zone, pulling his rattling car up to a set of massive, intricately designed wrought iron gates. Highly trained private security guards wearing dark, tailored suits stood firmly at the entrance, meticulously checking engraved invitations and directing the elite guests toward a bustling valet stand. The wealthy passenger in the back seat abruptly ended his phone call, shoved a crumpled $5 bill onto the center console as a pathetic afterthought tip, and kicked the car door open. He stepped out into the crisp spring air without offering a single word of thanks or even making eye contact. Marcus mechanically reached over to grab the crumpled bill, his bruised, tired fingers brushing against the cracked plastic of his console. He let out a heavy, defeated sigh, shifting his foot onto the brake pedal, preparing to pull away from the glittering entrance and return to the miserable dark shadows of his ruined life. But before he could press the accelerator, a sudden burst of brilliant cinematic light caught his immediate attention. He turned his head and looked through his smudged, dirty windshield. Mounted just beyond the towering wrought iron gates, beautifully illuminated by professional-grade stage lights, stood an enormous, breathtaking billboard. The sign was flawlessly designed, featuring lush green botanical foliage and crisp modern typography that radiated absolute luxury. Marcus squinted his exhausted, bloodshot eyes, struggling to focus on the large text. When the glowing words finally registered in his tired brain, the breath was violently knocked from his lungs. The massive billboard read, "The Thorn Ecological Sanctuary. Founded and designed by Chloe Thorne, in proud partnership with the Thorne Medical Empire." Marcus froze completely, his heart slammed against his ribs with a terrifying erratic rhythm. Chloe. The name echoed repeatedly in his mind, carrying the crushing, unbearable weight of 1,000 deep regrets. He gripped the steering wheel so tightly, his hands began to shake violently. He leaned forward, pressing his pale face close to the cold glass of his windshield, desperately trying to comprehend the sheer magnitude of the sign standing before him. He had arrogantly assumed she would fail. He had confidently and cruelly predicted she would die in absolute poverty, living in a rotting wooden shack with a broke pensioner. Instead, her name was currently plastered across an immense billboard, permanently and legally tied to the most powerful medical dynasty in the entire state. She was not just a survivor who had escaped his cruelty. She was a visionary founder, a brilliant creator, and an undeniable corporate titan. Drawn by a morbid, intensely self-destructive curiosity, Marcus shifted his car into park, completely ignoring the angry, blaring honks from a luxury SUV idling right behind him. He rolled down his manual window, letting the crisp spring air and the sudden sound of thunderous, overwhelming applause wash over him. He looked past the massive wrought iron gates, his gaze tracking across the expansive, blooming botanical gardens until he spotted the main event pavilion. The area was flooded with brilliant media lights, rapid camera flashes, and the wealthiest elite of the city, and standing right in the center of it all, elevated high on a crystal podium, was Chloe. The sight of her hit Marcus with the devastating lethal force of a physical strike. She was wearing a stunning, floor-length emerald green designer gown that made her look like absolute undeniable royalty. The rich fabric caught the stage lights shimmering with every confident, graceful movement she made. Her hair fell in perfect cascading waves, and a magnificent diamond necklace rested elegantly against her collarbone, catching the light of 100 cameras. She was radiant, incredibly powerful, and entirely breathtaking. This was the exact same woman he had mercilessly dragged through the mud. This was the woman he had coldly called a defective machine, completely convinced she was entirely useless to his grand, arrogant legacy. Now she was commanding the absolute, undivided respect of billionaires, powerful politicians, and national media networks. She looked completely untouchable, proudly ruling an empire of beauty and healing that she had built entirely from scratch. She was not just wealthy, she was profoundly, vibrantly alive. Marcus stared at her, his eyes burning intensely with unshed tears, as the absolute crushing reality of his monumental failure finally settled deep into his bones. He had held a brilliant queen in his hands, and he had foolishly traded her away for a lifetime of debt betrayal and absolute misery. He was permanently trapped in a cheap, rattling car, wearing faded clothes, begging for $5 tips, while the woman he discarded stood on a literal pedestal, reigning over a magnificent paradise he could never, ever touch. Marcus pressed his trembling hand against the manual crank of his car door, slowly rolling down the smudged window to get a clearer view of the magnificent gala. The cool spring air rushed into the stale cabin of his vehicle, carrying the bright sounds of clinking champagne glasses and joyous laughter. He felt physically heavy, weighed down by the profound, inescapable reality of his own absolute aging. His face was lined with deep, permanent wrinkles, carved by endless nights of sheer panic and mounting medical debt. His shoulders sagged under the cheap fabric of his faded uniform. He was no longer the arrogant, powerful executive who ruthlessly dictated the lives of everyone around him. He was a ghost, a pathetic shadow haunting the outer perimeter of a vibrant world that had completely moved on without him. He stared through the wrought iron gates, his bloodshot eyes desperately drinking in the sight of Chloe. She looked so perfectly serene, so incredibly whole. He desperately wanted to shout her name, to fall on his knees and beg for just one single final ounce of her famous, boundless mercy. But the pathetic, useless words died in his dry throat. He was entirely paralyzed by the staggering magnitude of his own monumental failure. The bright media lights continued to flash, illuminating the lush green foliage of the sanctuary and the sparkling diamond necklace resting against her collarbone. As Marcus sat frozen in his idling vehicle, a subtle shift occurred on the main event lawn. Elias stepped down from his seat in the front row, carefully adjusting his secure grip on the twin boys, resting comfortably in his strong arms. The billionaire titan looked effortlessly powerful in his tailored suit, projecting a terrifying magnetic aura of absolute unwavering authority over his domain. As Elias turned his head to scan the perimeter of the sprawling estate, his sharp predatory eyes swept past the media pit, past the elegant event tents, and locked directly onto the dark, rattling sedan parked just outside the front gates. The distance between them was significant, but the eye contact was completely undeniable. The air in Marcus's chest evaporated. He felt exposed, stripped bare beneath the heavy, calculating gaze of the man who had mercilessly dismantled his entire corporate existence in a single afternoon. Elias did not look surprised to see his defeated enemy lurking in the shadows. He did not point him out to security or display a single ounce of lingering anger. Instead, Elias offered a response that was far more devastating than any physical blow. He simply smiled. It was a calm, definitive winning smile. It was the serene expression of an absolute conqueror who had entirely secured his kingdom. Elias shifted his weight proudly, displaying the two healthy, robust heirs resting against his chest before turning his back on Marcus forever. The quiet, deliberate dismissal struck Marcus with lethal precision. The invisible tether connecting him to his former life was permanently severed by that single victorious smile. Marcus frantically grabbed the window crank, hastily rolling up the smudged glass to block out the overwhelming sounds of celebration and triumph. The stale, lukewarm air of his cheap car instantly swallowed him whole again, sealing him inside a suffocating, moving coffin. He slammed his foot onto the accelerator, steering the dented sedan away from the brilliantly illuminated wrought iron gates and driving blindly into the desolate pitch-black night. He gripped the sticky steering wheel so tightly his knuckles ached, but the physical pain was entirely eclipsed by the massive, agonizing wave of emotional devastation crashing down upon him. The dam finally broke. Marcus let out a raw, guttural sob that tore violently from his throat. He completely and utterly broke down in the driver's seat, his entire trembling body violently shaking with aggressive, uncontrollable tremors, as hot, incredibly pathetic tears continuously streamed down his ruined, deeply weathered face. He wept for the massive corporate wealth he had foolishly squandered. He wept for the innocent, sick child waiting for him in a freezing, dark apartment. But mostly he wept with absolute crushing regret for throwing away the brilliant, devoted woman who had just changed the world without him. He was completely consumed by sheer, inescapable humiliation, destined to spend the rest of his miserable life driving in circles while the woman he discarded built an eternal legacy. Back on the pristine event lawn, the air was vibrating with pure electric joy. I stepped down from the glowing crystal podium, leaving the flashing media cameras and cheering crowds behind me. I walked gracefully and slowly across the perfectly manicured grass, my exquisite emerald silk gown trailing beautifully behind me as I confidently made my way directly toward the center of my entirely new universe. Elias stood waiting for me beneath the blooming cherry blossoms, holding our beautiful twin boys securely against his broad chest. His dark eyes radiated an incredibly fierce, unconditional love that still took my breath away. I securely wrapped both of my arms tightly around his strong, familiar waist, peacefully leaning my tired head against his broad, comforting shoulder as I proudly looked out over the sprawling 50-acre ecological sanctuary. The breathtaking waterfalls, the thriving botanical gardens, and the state-of-the-art medical pavilions all stood as a magnificent, living testament to absolute survival. I looked at the massive empire I had successfully built from the darkest ashes of my past. I looked at the powerful, devoted man who had fiercely protected my heart, and I looked at the two healthy, perfect sons who had brought my soul back to life. The bitter memories of rejection and betrayal were completely washed away by the brilliant golden light of my new reality. Family is absolutely not the blood that binds you to abuse. Family is the person who stands beside you when you have absolutely nothing and helps you build a magnificent empire from the ashes. The screen slowly fades to absolute black. The most powerful lesson from Chloe's journey is that our true worth is never defined by those who abandon us. When her toxic ex-husband discarded her, he thought he had destroyed her future. Instead, that crushing betrayal became the very soil from which she bloomed. Chloe proved that fierce resilience can transform the ashes of heartbreak into an empire of success. She reminds us that true family isn't bound by blood, but by the people who protect you when you have nothing. Reclaim your power and build your own sanctuary today. How have you turned betrayal into strength? Comment below.